Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MMANC's Webinar Wednesday. The MMANC recently launched Webinar Wednesday as a way to bring to our members new content over the next several weeks. We know times have been tough and everybody's adapting to their new normal, so it's our hope that we can help shine a light on your new frontier by bringing you useful guidance on a myriad of different topics. Also, I just want to take a note that thanks for joining us today. We know that times have been challenging. We have a lot of new conversation we're monitoring in our community due to the death of George Floyd and activism taking place in our country. And so we know it's been quite heavy on our local cities. And so we hope today that you could just take a break with us. I want to introduce Valerie Gaeta-Phillips, President of Bob Murray & Associates. Hi, Valerie.
Good morning.
Valerie's here today to talk to us about recruiting trends and video interviewing. When Valerie and I were talking yesterday, we really wanted to kind of pose this as a coffee and conversation, right, Valerie?
Yes, absolutely.
So we have our coffee here. Feel free to get your coffee and tea, and we encourage you to just have a conversation with us. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Communications Manager Lauren Sagayan. I'm with the City of Union City. I'm also a Region 4 board member. That's Region 4 is with the East Bay. And then also I want to introduce Emma Tozer. She's Communications Coordinator with the City of Union City. Hi, Emma.
Hello.
I just want to thank Emma for joining us today. I kind of pulled her into this. She's really the communications brain in the City of Union City, and she's going to be helping to moderate our conversation. She'll be tracking all of your questions coming in. So thanks, Emma, in advance. And before we jump over to Valerie, I just want to note, thanks for logging on to Blue Jeans. I know this is probably a new platform in addition to everybody using all the other different teleconferencing platforms. So we encourage your participation today. There's 3 ways in which you can participate with us. One is a raise your hand feature, so it looks like a hand off to the side of your screen. If you utilize that option, that means that we will be able to promote you to a speaker. So if you want to be heard today, or you want to show your face and turn your video on, which we would love to have you join us, that's certainly an option for you to participate today. In addition, there is a chat feature and a question and an answer feature. Those are also ways that you can send questions into us today. And with that said, I wanted to turn it over to you, Valerie. Can you talk to us about yourself for those who don't know you, and about your company, Bob Murray & Associates?
Sure. So good morning, welcome. I look forward to kind of taking on some of your questions. I'm really anxious to see what types of questions you have. I know what I want to talk about, but I'm curious to see what you guys want to ask me. So I'm president of Bob Murray & Associates, have been for a little over 6 years. My husband and I own the firm, a Latina-owned business, yay. And my background is recruiting. So I came out of high tech from the Bay Area, actually, working in high tech for about 15 years. And then with Bob Murray & Associates, I worked for Bob for about 1.5 years before I bought the firm. So it's been really a fun ride. It's been a transition going from high tech to the public sector. Bringing some of my skill set from the high tech, and that was very different, much more fast paced. I tend to be a little hyper and fast paced myself, so it was a very huge transition for me to go from the private sector to the public sector recruiting, where the public sector definitely has its own timeline. And so that's been the big adjustment for me, but it's been great. I've met a lot of you folks through MMANC, the Women's Leadership Summit, ICMA conferences, and so I'm really anxious to take your questions today. We tend to take on about close to a little over 100 searches, recruitments a year. There's about 10 of us in our firm, recruiters as well as administrative staff. And actually today's the first day that my administrative staff is back in the office. We had them working from home for the past 2.5 months, as I'm sure most of you have been doing. And that's been a challenge in itself, because we're a small firm, but we support essential businesses. And so there's been those challenges. So I can imagine, I know what it looks like for you guys as well on your end. So again, we do over about 100 recruitments a year, mostly for municipalities, but it's local government, state, county, as well as many actually nonprofits. And we've done a little work in the private sector as well. So I think we may even have a couple of our team members on the call with us today. So I don't know if they'll pipe in or not or whatnot, but so that's just a little bit about me. I'm actually from the Bay Area, born and raised, and I love what I do. And so I'm really excited to talk to you guys. I look at MMANC and SC as that current wave as well as that upcoming wave of talent. I've been involved with you guys for about close to 7 years now, and I've seen a lot of you move into, assistant city manager positions, city manager positions, director positions, and I'm so proud of you guys. And I've had quite a few of you reach out to me or my husband or one of our recruiters for some advice when you're going to interview, even if it's not through our firm. So it's really important for me and my firm to cultivate these relationships with you guys. So I'm at the end of this broadcast, I'm hoping some of you will connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you have other questions, if you're too shy to ask, feel free to give me a call.
Thanks, Valerie. And I just have to say, it's so nice to have a human warm aspect come when we're talking about interviewing and hiring and recruiting, because I think most of us don't see it that way right off the bat. And so hearing that directly from you really helps. I'm going to go ahead and ask a few questions, and then we'll be taking in questions. So I'll be kind of going back and forth between live and just having a conversation with you. So I think the most burning question, Valerie, is how has COVID-19 changed the landscape of hiring and recruiting today? And are there trends yet to be seen this early in it?
So yes, it's changed tremendously. As a recruiter, when we conduct our preliminary interviews, I've interviewed quite a few of you folks. I was already doing video interviews. Sometimes I would travel down to Southern California and set up maybe 6 interviews in a row and kind of sit at the Marriott and knock them out. But the client pays for that. So I think it's cost effective. So I have already been doing Zoom interviews, Skype, FaceTime interviews, and have been for a couple of years now, unless somebody's local and they want to come into the office and meet with me. What I've seen that's changed now is that we had probably close to 20 open recruitments, if not more, when all this COVID hit. And it really impacted our recruitments. They were looking to us to help them, I think, because a lot of cities were just, and counties or special districts were unsure of what to do. And quite frankly, we didn't really know a lot either. So we really had to kind of guide a lot of our clients to help facilitate Zoom interviews. We tend to use Zoom just because it's easy, but now we have Blue Jeans, so maybe we'll use that. But really helping our clients facilitate virtual interviewing, and we had some hiccups with that. When you're working with a city council or a board, that's definitely trickier. I just worked with a board, a nonprofit, and they had 15 people on the panel. And that's a little daunting in person. So as an interview, setting up the Zoom, preparing for that, that's been the big change. A lot of what we're sending are ebooks rather than the printed fancy books that my firm usually puts together. We're sending out an ebook to our clients. So it's having to adjust. So we've had to kind of pivot how we do things. Because my husband and I both come out of high tech, it's made it an easier transition, but we have clients that are struggling with that. And I still had clients that wanted to do the virtual interview first round, but face-to-face second. And you can't make people do that, especially at the height of this. So it's really been tough kind of navigating that. And now that restrictions are lifting somewhat, we're still doing the video conferencing interviews. And I foresee that continuing. And that may be something that stays in place, at least for the first round of interviews. Now for city manager, GM, those level CEO interviews, you definitely need to do a face-to-face interview. And so we've had some of our city manager recruitments get put on hold or pushed out so that we could see where we're at in about 4 or 5 months so that the person can come in and meet in person. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. I think that the videos are going to continue. I think it's a good resource. I think our clients need to get more comfortable with it. Looks like Union City's got it dialed in. but you'd be surprised some bigger cities do not. It's surprising to me. So we're trying to help them navigate that. So that's what I'm seeing on the way of trends. I think the video interviews are going to continue. Yes, absolutely. I think they already are with our firm, but with our client, I see that happening. Second round interviews, I'm unsure what that's going to look like. I think we're all a little bit unsure what that's going to look like, because as soon as they lift the restrictions, we're back into cold and flu season again. So, we're like in our office, and I'm sure you guys do this. I've gone to cities where they take your temperature before you go in, and they give you hand wipes and sanitizer. So it's just a new world.
Thanks, Valerie. And I just want to note, because I know I can see this and you can't, we have about 55 people that have logged on with us. So yay, thanks everyone
Awesome.
for joining. I just want to remind, for those of you who joined us after 9 o'clock, you can participate, ask us questions. We really encourage it. You can either use the raise your hand feature, the video or the Q&A feature, or the chat feature to send in your questions. So we really encourage that. Valerie, on that note, in terms of trends, we know that most of us in local city government are facing uphill battles with our budgets, given the impacts of COVID-19. What are local government executives telling you about hiring in the future? We've seen such a dip in job opportunities. Can we expect job prospects to be limited moving into the future?
Unfortunately, yes. Like I mentioned, we had over 20 recruitments live, I believe, when it was end of February, and they got cut in half, literally in half. And we had, requests for proposals. We kind of gauge what things are going to look like, because when we submit a proposal, we typically get about a third of the ones that we submit. And we just weren't getting the request for proposals. And we're like, that there's always these little tells. And then talking to a lot of the city managers that we've placed, Bay Area cities as well as Southern California, and the 11 Western states, they're uncertain. And some of them do know that they're going to have some big cuts. And what's that going to look like? I know there's cities in the Bay Area that just cut huge amounts of folks out of their, it could be Parks and Rec, or it could be, so I think it's that unknown, but I definitely think there's going to be a dip. But what's it going to look like next year? I really don't know. But, I think, and we talked about this yesterday, but there's still going to be positions out there. There's still going to be cities that are open to, maybe first-time city managers, even though there's this crisis going on. So, don't lose hope. I don't want to sound like doom and gloom. I think the difference is going to be there's going to be a lot of competition for these positions now. So you got to take your A game up when you interview on the video, and that's why we're talking today, so I can help you guys be successful when you interview, video interview.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. And that was actually going to be my next question. And I want to poke fun at myself, because I would have done this from home today to kind of replicate, where I would be doing an interview if I was. But I had to get away from my 5-year-old. So I'm actually in City Hall in the mayor's office. And so I wouldn't recommend anybody interview from your mayor's office. But in terms of, just the setup, what are those, just for someone who hasn't done it before, in terms of background, appearance, all those kinds of things, what can you give us some tips on the interviewing?
So yes, probably a lot of tips, because I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm going to start off by saying, practice. And I mentioned this earlier, even if you just use your iPhone or your computer, and you use your Skype or your FaceTime, whatever it may be, even if it's not Zoom or whatever it is that you're going to be using for your interview. So you can literally set up your FaceTime so that you can see yourself. So set it up where you're going to have your interview, where you're going to conduct your interview, and look at how you look. Look at the lighting, because right now I have windows behind me, and normally that would make me look really dark. So I'd look like I was some kind of Secret Service, and you'd see a shadow. You wouldn't even see my face, but I've got a little light here that you adjust. Gary and I have it dialed in because we've been doing this for years now. Is it perfect? No, but you don't want too busy of a background if you can avoid that. If you got bookshelves behind you, be careful what kind of books you have on the shelf. Distractions happen. Turn your cell phone off. you can't help it if the dog barks or somebody rings the doorbell. That's not really, it might throw you off for your interview, but I mean, that's okay. So we've all seen the video of the little one running into the office while dad's conducting a video conference. That kind of stuff happens, but there's certain things that you really can try to prevent. And because I've seen this, I think people think because it's a video interview, they treat it a little too casually. I've had candidates that interview with me, but also interview with a panel or a council or a board, and it looks like they just rolled out of bed. And I can see them, and I'm like, oh my God, did she lose her comb? I just think you need to pretend that you are actually going in for the interview. Dress for the job that you want. My recommendation is put on pants, because my husband's interviewed someone who had a shirt and tie on, stood up and didn't have his pants on. He was walking around in his boxers to close the door. It's like, you have to really treat it as if you're going into the interview. Be prepared, but dress professionally, practice the technology, look at the lighting. If you're going to use a virtual background, which I do when I use Zoom, it makes it look like I have Bob Murray and Associates sign behind me, which is pretty cool. Virtual backgrounds are okay, but don't use one that has planets floating around behind you, or the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I mean, make it look like it's professional, even if it's just a solid color or a bookcase or whatever it may be. So those are some of my tips. The lighting, practice the technology, dress for the job, prepare, but we can kind of get into that in a little bit. Familiarize yourself with the technology. That's really important. We did a practice run of this yesterday, and I'm glad we did, because there can be hiccups. Practice with someone. Make sure your Skype is working, your Zoom, whatever it is that you're going to use. That would be my recommendation, because the worst thing is to have your interview, you're 10 minutes late starting your interview because you couldn't get your camera to work or your microphone to work. It's the worst, and it happens a lot, and it frustrates the panelists. So those are some of my tips.
Yeah, and Valerie's being polite, because we had quite a big hiccup when we went to rehearse yesterday. So we're glad we fixed it so we can join you today. Valerie, I'm going to quickly throw it to Emma. We have had some questions come in. Emma, can you throw a question our way from our audience?
Yeah, so we have two from Ariana, so I'll just ask both of those now. What are the top 1 to 3 most common questions you see at the executive level, and do you anticipate that interviewers will ask COVID-related questions, for example, around change management?
So yes to that last question. I most recently have had some panel interviews, and they do ask what they feel the impact of COVID is going to be on the organization, what's their opinion, how would they address it. So yes, there are going to be questions. What that exactly looks like, I don't know. It could be more finance related. It could be, or it may be very open-ended, and they want to see where you take it. So yes, I've seen that just recently on a CEO recruitment as well as a director of finance recruitment. The top 3 questions, well, it really, depends if it's a city manager position, director of finance. They are going to, what I'm finding every client asks is they want to know what you know about the organization. And I can't tell you how many people fall down on the question. And some of them may have done the research, but they didn't give any meat showing, any examples showing that they had. And they can tell if you're BSing your way through it as well. And I tell my candidates, even city manager candidates, do your homework. I shouldn't have to hold your hand to tell you, you need to read the budget, you need to do this, you guys have to do it. You got to watch council meetings, because that's really where you're going to find out what the city looks like, where it's going. If you know someone within the city, give them a call, find out what the culture is like. The more prepared you are, the better your interview is going to come across. There's no set 3 questions that I can give you, but the most important to me is really, why are you interested in this position? You never want to say just because where it's located. That's okay to add that, but you never want to just say that. That's where you need to say, well, I see that the city's blah, 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 doing this, whatever it may be, even if it's how it's handling the COVID crisis or Black Lives Matter. Use those examples, because it's current, it's happening, and it shows that you are up to date and you're paying attention. And then, of course, the question about what can you tell us about us? It may be that type of question. And then there's always the one that we always suggest they ask, and they love it, is, give us an example of a failure. What was it? And what did you do? What did you learn from it? And what would you have done differently? Please do not say you don't have a failure, because everybody does. Everyone does. But also make sure you're not giving something that's absolutely crazy as an example either. It's that fine medium, because I've had people come in and they just shoot themselves in the foot, and I'm like, oh wow, that's not an example I would have given. So I mean, you really have to think through these things, but those would be the questions that to me are pretty consistently asked.
Thanks, Valerie. And before I turn it back to Emma to take, we have a few more questions come in, and I wanted to talk about, just with everything going on in our country right now, and really over the last few years, we've had sort of the women's movement becoming a part of the national conversation. Now we're talking about race. Can you tell us how some of these conversations make its way into the hiring and recruiting practice? What do you hear from local government executives, or how do you yourself build diversity and inclusion into your practices?
Well, it's important to me, just growing up Latina, and being a woman. So it's I've got two checks right there. But I think for us, it's in our proposals already. So before even a client asks, we list about conducting inclusive recruitments, where we pull in a diverse pool of candidates and how we go about doing that. So we're already setting the stage. If someone selects our firm or they interview me, I just met with some folks in the city of San Francisco who had a lot of questions about race equity and how we go about, targeting folks, but making it a fair process. We're casting that wide net. So we kind of explain how we go about doing that, and belonging to organizations like this, Blacks in government, Asians in professionals in government, women leading government. So we have all that listed in our proposals, and I speak to it when I meet with a client, because Bob Murray and Associates, when we bought the firm, had an amazing reputation. Bob, everybody knew Bob. Bob has placed probably more city managers than Ralph Anderson and Avery combined. He just was kind of this icon, but it was a changing of the guard, and it was long past due. Bob's a phenomenal person, but I think we needed a leader like myself and my husband that could connect with you guys. And Bob knew everyone, at ICMA, but didn't know anyone at MMANC and SC. And so I think that's helped us, because we do belong to a lot of the organizations like MMANC and Women Leading Government. And we sponsor a lot of events so that we can speak to that and, tap into those pool of candidates. And we let our clients know that. Now, what I'm hearing from clients, and have been, I see more progressive clients typically in the Bay Area, quite frankly. We do a lot of work all through the 11 Western states, but the Bay Area, Portland, Seattle area, we tend to see much more progressive thinking, which I'm sure that doesn't really surprise you guys. Orange County, not quite, it's a little more conservative. LA, a little more progressive. So we do get clients who make it it's in the forefront of that we really need some diversity in this candidate pool, because and I agree that the candidate pool, some of the candidates should reflect the community, and there's more conversations happening around that. Was that happening 6 or 7 years ago? Not really, with some organizations, but really not many. But we're seeing it more and more now, where I think city managers are getting a little more pressure from council members saying, you need to have more diverse executive team, because it starts at the top. So we are having those conversations with our clients and city managers. There's a lot of really good city managers out there. They're aware of that, and they know that they're having those conversations with staff, with the recruiting firm. And when we sit down with staff to kick off a search, it's the same thing. So I hope that answers your question. I think I'm talking way too much. As long as I'm not talking too fast, because I've had very strong coffee.
No, you aren't at all. And I really appreciate, because I will say that the MMANC chimed in on this national conversation taking place. So I know a lot of our members care about this topic. So we just really appreciate you, approaching it with us. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Emma, I think we have a couple more questions from our audience. Can you let us know what they are?
Yeah. Have one from Weston. Any advice for people interviewing to be a first-time city manager?
I love that question. I get it all the time. Well, any advice? Really, it's, do your homework. If you're working with an executive recruiter, talk to the recruiter, get as much information you can about the culture, any issues. I had a friend who interviewed and she got the position for a city manager down in Southern California in Orange County. And this is her though. She watched like 6 months worth of council meetings. I'm like, oh my God, how did you do that? That I can barely get through Netflix. So, but I think it showed in her interview. She did an amazing job. They loved her. She felt like she had a rapport with each of the council members because she had done so much homework. And when you watch them, you get to see the personalities, again, the good, the bad, the ugly, so that you're better prepared when you go in. And as a candidate, first time city manager candidate, don't sell yourself short. Make sure that you're confident. You might be up against other city managers, but we've placed a lot of first time city managers. And I'd say about 99% of them have had great success, and there's that percentage that it just doesn't work out, and usually it's just because it's not a fit. It is nothing negative on the candidate. So all I can really offer is that you need to be prepared. Work with your recruiter, your executive recruiter. Do your homework.
As a follow-up to that, Valerie, and I know something that I've always kind of, it's always been perplexing to me is resumes. So as we're sort of making ourselves more visible to you and other recruiters, you mentioned to me before how different recruiters prefer different formats for resumes. Can you speak to that? Maybe you can't speak to the other recruiters, but can you say, what is it specifically you're looking for in a resume? 1 page, 2 page, what sort of order of information? So
I'm going to put it out there right now. I'm a little ADD, so you need to be concise and to the point. So, I've sat on panels at MMANC with other recruiters before, fantastic recruiters, by the way, and we definitely have different styles. I tend to like, a 2 to 3 page resume. Make sure the dates are clear, make sure, have someone read it. Have a couple of people read it. I've had city managers send me a cover letter and resume and it's addressed to Avery and Associates. Or, they've cut and pasted. You don't want to cut and paste it. Your letter should be specific to that position. If you have to go back to the job brochure, reread it, reread about the city, reread about the position and the ideal candidate. And your cover letter should support some of the ideal candidate things that a city's looking for. And those are the soft skills that may not be listed in your resume because that's going to be more of your successes and what you do. So you really need to make sure that you're supporting that, especially if you're a first time city manager candidate. You may not have had this direct experience, but talk about briefly touch on something that may be similar. And then remember that when you interview as well, that you may not have, if they ask you a question and you don't have that direct experience, you could tell them I don't have that direct experience, but this is what I do have that I think is, relatable to the experience that you're asking about, and then give that example. So I like a concise resume, 2 to 3 pages, 1 page cover letter. Do not send me a novel. I do not like a lot of fluff in my cover letters. I know another recruiter, she does. She wants that touchy feely, pull my heartstring. I don't. Because I think that's my high tech experience coming out. I just want direct, give it to me. If you want to message me offline, you can do that. I always tell people send me a message to LinkedIn. Hey Val, I sent you a resume, but I didn't include this. I just thought you should know this. I'm okay with that. So as far as the rest of the recruiters in my firm, I'm guessing they're about the same. We all tend to be a little bit alike. We kind of powwow every other week and talk about resumes and searches and candidates and share some thoughts, and they tend to be the same way. But we've got a former director of HR and 2 former police chiefs, which, so I'm not surprised that they want concise as well and to the point. not too much fluff. So that's my 2 cents, but I'm hoping to tell you guys that that's me. So you need to develop a relationship with Avery, with Ralph Anderson, with Peckham, and find out what it is that they like and what they're looking for when they're screening resumes. Because you get that 2-second screening, and then poof, you're either in the yes pile or the no pile, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah, and we have a few more questions coming in, Valerie, which is awesome.
Okay.
So they're going to jump around a little bit. It might not flow.
That's fine.
I just want to say hi to Aaron. Aaron Steffen wrote into us. Valerie, do you recommend keeping notes in front of you during a virtual interview, or is that too distracting?
That's a good question, because even in an in-person interview, I've had panelists say, why was he or she writing down the whole time, looking down at their notes? And then I've had others say, well, why didn't they keep notes? So that's really a tough one. If you're the type of person that you're going to be looking down, like I've got notes in front of me right now and you can't see my face. If you find that you're doing that, then you do not want to have notes in front of you. If you want to put them on the wall in front of you, then do that, because they won't see the notes, and you can kind of look up and at your notes, little talking points that maybe, or little bullets that you want to make sure that you touch on for the interview. I think it's okay to write down the question, the interview question, because sometimes it can be a 2 or 3 part question, and you can, half the time candidates are asking them to repeat it. So sometimes I think that's okay to sit there and write the question if it's a long question. That way you can look back to it and then answer. But always try to remember to keep your head up and look at the camera and look at your picture on the interview so that you see how you're looking. Because if you're slumped over, if you're looking down, and then pay attention to those types of things, especially on video. So that's my 2 cents.
Valerie, I know in some of our conversations preparing for today, we talked about fit and how really it's so important that most of us taking jobs today aren't just for pay or for that title, but more for fit. Jennifer wrote into us asking this question: how do you really know and evaluate whether you're fit for an organization or whether it's the culture that you can see yourself in?
Well, if it's a city manager recruitment, you'll know once you're interviewing with the 5 city council members what that's going to feel like. And if there's some red flags or concerns, pay attention to that. If you know anyone within the organization, let's say it's a director level or manager level position, call someone and find out, get some input on how they see the organization. If you don't know anyone, you might be able to call HR. I'm not sure how much they can offer you. But I think, you've got to be a sleuth detective and kind of do your research prior to that. Because everything's, wine and roses the day of the interview, and, they're so great, but you need to really and then you need to look at, the culture. How is that going to be impacted by COVID-19? And so what is that culture going to look like 6 months from now, a year from now? They're going to be laying people off. Are you the one that's going to be laying people off? There's going to be massive cuts. So what is that going to look like, and how is that going to impact the culture? Because it is going to impact the culture. Morale is going to be low. It's going to be tough, but that's going to be a lot of cities and organizations. So you really need to think about all of that when you're interviewing with an organization and do your homework.
Valerie, I love this question from Renee, because I know I always have this question myself. What's reasonable in terms of reaching out to recruiters, we know that we hear the message that we need to do it to increase our awareness and our visibility and to build a relationship, but what's, I guess, acceptable in terms of reaching out and what level?
So sometimes you have to be a pest. And I hate to say that, because I probably kick myself right now for saying that, but I try to be good about calling folks back, because I get my cell phone out, even at all these conferences, and my cell phone's on my business card, or you call my office, or you can shoot me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook. But you have to sometimes be persistent. At least I know that way with myself, and Gary's probably better at calling people back quicker than I am. Life gets in the way for me, and then I'm like, okay, I got a couple folks I need to call back, and I know why they're calling, because they want some advice on their resume, or they're going to interview and they want some tips. And I actually love that. It's just sometimes I get bogged down in other things. So Not that that's an excuse, but I think it's really, because I say it all the time, you have to develop those relationships with the recruiters. I love it. I love getting to know you guys, and sometimes it's taken a little bit longer because that's probably on my end, but be persistent. Just don't call me after 9 o'clock at night or before 7 in the morning. I tell council members that as well. So I say be persistent. Our firm has a couple of recruiters, so there's not just myself, but there's Gary, there's Joel, there's Regan, there's Carmen. So reach out to any of us, and we're more than willing to talk with you and give you some advice, and you just have to be open to it. Sometimes we may tell you something that isn't necessarily what you want to hear, but that is nothing personal. It's just our opinion, and what you take with that is up to you. We may say, well, they're not going to hire, it's really hard to break in as a first-time city manager when you don't have this, but it's not to say it's impossible, but we're giving you our opinion as recruiters and what we've seen on recruitments. But, ping us, call us. If you've got an interview, I tell even city managers, look, if you're interviewing with another city, let me know and I'll send you some sample interview questions just to get you thinking. You wouldn't think a city manager needs that, but, everybody does. Everybody needs to practice. Interviewing is not easy.
Thanks, Valerie. We have more questions coming in, so yay. I'm going to turn to Emma. She's continuing to monitor. Emma, can you throw Valerie your next question?
Yeah, this one is from Danielle, and she's asking, how important is it to speak about your soft skills in an interview, such as the emotional intelligence and vulnerability?
I think you have to kind of gauge how the interview is going. I think that soft skills are extremely important in an interview. Yeah, you can list off all your accomplishments, but they're also looking to see, what kind of leader you are and, how you've dealt with difficult situations and just your style. So that definitely needs to come through in an interview. I've had folks who share their assessments that they've had done, and what is it, Myers-Briggs? I can't remember what the assessment is, but so that's okay to do. I wouldn't necessarily go on and on about it, but you can offer it up. There's other folks who have done outside, whether it's Toastmasters or, there's a couple of other organizations. And if you want to offer those types of things up as in support to a question that maybe was asked, I think that's fine.
All right, and so I'm going to ask another question. This is from Tanya. Let's see. How do you know you're ready to take the next step in your career? What are the right questions to ask yourself?
Well, I think I get this question a lot, and it's so funny. Not to focus on this, but it tends to be women who don't go for it, and men that always do. Which is always interesting to me. So if we could just take a little bit of that and put it in women, then we would, be perfect. But I think we always second guess ourselves. So I think, again, establishing that relationship with the recruiter, because you may look at a job description and think, well, I only have 8 of the 10 things that they're looking for in the way of skill set on this job description. But if you call the recruiter and say, well, I only have 8, what I'm going to tell you is apply. And I never discourage anyone from applying, even if they don't meet half of what they're looking for. I think it's important to get the practice of writing a cover letter, putting your resume together and applying. If there's a position out there that you want, you go for it. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't. So don't second guess yourself. Now, if you're coming in as, a summer intern and then you're throwing your hat in the ring for a city manager recruitment, probably not going to happen. But, talk to your HR, talk to your supervisor and what are your goals? So I think having a plan, and we don't always stick to the plan, but it helps to have kind of, these are the steps I need to take to get to where I want to be. You may veer a little bit on the way, but I think it really helps to kind of have a game plan of what your goals are and how you're going to go about getting there, and having a mentor and talking to HR and helping set out that plan so that you can get there. But don't second guess yourself on a position, especially if, like I said, if you checked off some of the boxes that they're looking for in the way of skill set and experience, you should be applying. Where'd you go?
I kid you not, the mayor's phone rang.
I didn't hear it.
Sorry about that. I had to step away and hang up on somebody. Okay, so we have more questions. I'm going to ask Rachel's question next. And Rachel, I hope that I understand your question. Rachel said that, just speaking to non-management, non-executive management positions, but really every other kind of pool where you tend to see a lot of applicants and you need to really go through a larger pool, perhaps interview a larger pool. Her city's been trying to kind of create virtual speed interviews to just kind of work through a larger pool. But they're finding that potentially it's just difficult to do that in the virtual environment. And I hope I'm addressing that question the right way, Rachel. Do you have any thoughts for Rachel on how to kind of get through a larger candidate pool, maybe for those non-management, non-executive management positions?
Okay, so is she talking about she's a candidate in the kind of speed interviews, or is she conducting the speed interviews?
Yeah, I get the sense from the question that she's the one conducting them or putting the process together in sort of our new normal.
Okay. Yeah, that's hard. There's a county up north that's doing that right now for a position that we help them advertise for. So they're kind of doing kind of a speed dating virtual interviews or phone calls. So you literally have 10 minutes to sell yourself on the phone call. That's not easy. Can't do that for executive level positions or manager level. So I could see where, maybe more entry level kind of, just starting off your career. I don't really have advice to that because I haven't done that before, except at the conference when we have 5 minutes to interview someone, or, we sit those mock interviews, but that's a little different. So, there's not a lot I can offer in the sense, you'll have to have the key questions. And I think with government, what's hard is that you have to ask the same question of every candidate. And then I guess you're grading them. So, good luck. That's a tough one. And I know I didn't really answer that question just because I can't really speak to that. I haven't done kind of the speed dating interviewing, but that's not easy.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to really what we're seeing across our industry, just with COVID and the new virtual environment, and so many systems of how we were doing things the way before. Now we have to change, and how do you get through all that? So.
Right, because one of the counties I have worked with, they're conducting phone interviews. So they're not even doing video. They're 50 resumes, and they're literally setting up times 10 minutes for each person and calling them. So, and then after that, they'll do a virtual interview. But that's tough.
All right, Emma, I'm going to turn to you. Do you have another question in?
Yeah, so this one is from Roberta. Do you have any advice on how to market yourself for an executive or manager position if you don't currently have a manager title, but you do have experience managing a team or a program?
Okay. So yes, so you're going to want to put that in your cover letter. You're going to want to, people have to learn to brand themselves better, utilize social media, even if it's LinkedIn, having your full, having your accomplishments, getting people to, what is on LinkedIn where people can recommend you, really taking advantage of those types of tools, I think are fantastic, because I know I look at them for candidates. As soon as someone applies, I'll go and look on there and see if they're on LinkedIn. And if they're not on LinkedIn, I always think, okay, are they 100 years old and don't know how to use the technology? What's going on? Or they don't have a picture? I always think that's just odd to me. So I think utilizing these different tools to brand yourself. If you don't have the manager title or supervisory title, I know one of the first questions we ask, okay, so you've been a project manager, but have you supervised direct reports? Be honest, because if you haven't, there's a difference. And so it's really hard to break into that. So that's something where, to me, the communication with your HR, with your supervisor, talking to a mentor, because I think if you want to get into a manager, let's say a deputy director or director level position, you have to have managed, supervised direct reports. Is it absolutely mandatory? Maybe not for all organizations, but for the recruitments that we handle, It absolutely is. You'll have to have, where you're writing their annual reviews, so it really, have you had a disciplinary action with an employee or put them, PIP or whatever it may be. All that is really important when you're moving up to that level of position. It just shows they want to see what your style is like, your management style, your leadership, and what type of issues you've had to deal with when you supervise folks. So not to say you can't break into it, but if you haven't supervised direct reports, try to, even if it's just one person. And if you can't, then continue what you're doing, but talk about what your role is and sell yourself on that and what it is that you're doing when you're project managing or looking over some folks. Because to me, that's been the toughest part for some folks, is when they don't have that direct experience supervising and they're trying to get into a management level position. It's tough.
Thanks, Valerie. And just for a quick time check, we're almost at 9:50. So I want to remind everybody here that you can send us your questions. We'll take questions for a few more minutes, maybe up until 9:55 before we conclude the event. So please send your questions in. Most of you are using the event chat feature, so that's really helpful. We're able to see your questions come in. Valerie, Petra had a question, and I think it's a great question. For someone coming from as a state worker or from education, or maybe even from a district that's trying to get into local city government, what do you think that person needs to do differently to get interviews at the executive level? So coming from sort of a different industry of government into another.
Which we've done. We've placed folks from county into municipal, local government and special districts. So it does happen. It depends, for me and for my firm, what it's going to come down is the competition, whether you're going to get an interview with us or not. There's really, you can write a fantastic cover letter, you could have the right experience, and you really, again, I'm going to tell you to go back to that job brochure because it's a wealth of information, and write your cover letter to support what it is that we are looking for in that position. And then make sure that your resume supports it with your accomplishments and budgets, and make sure your dates are clear. So you can do all those things, and more than likely you'll get an interview with us because we're kind of that buffer between our client. But it's really going to depend on the candidate pool and the competition. If we only have, let's say, 30 applicants, and maybe we have 5 other finance folks that are with local government and a couple with county, and you're coming from county, we probably will interview you. Now, if we've got 10 folks maybe that are coming from other municipalities that maybe are already at the assistant director level, you might not get an interview. You might get a phone call from me, but you might not get an interview. So it really depends on the candidate pool. And what that's going to look like coming up in the future, it might be much more competitive.
Valerie, somebody wrote into us, and I think you talked about this a little bit earlier when we had a question regarding COVID-19 and how that is making its way in as a conversation piece in interviews and recruitments. How do you see police chief and leadership recruitments changing in the current environment?
Yes, so that's, I think, because we have a couple of recruitments going on right now for police chief. Probably about 3 or 4 at least. So we've always, that's a very involved recruitment, just as involved as a city manager recruitment. We're meeting with stakeholders, community members. I think for a city to be successful in finding their next police chief, you have to have that kind of input. Whether it's you're sending out survey monkeys or you're sitting down with community groups, with stakeholders, with staff, I think it's really important. I know with our firm, we do this, to do that. All that upfront work and having those conversations. We've even had kind of like town hall meetings to talk about what are you looking for in your next police chief, especially if there's been issues in the city. I have 2 former police chief, retired chiefs that work for our firm. One's from Walnut Creek and the other one was from the city of Sunnyvale. Phenomenal. great guys, and they do a great job on our recruitments. We also work on police chief recruitments, but they take the bulk of them just because they know the lingo, and they were fantastic chiefs with great reputations. There's a lot of great cops out there, and I know with Black Lives Matter, it's really touchy situation right now, and there's a lot of concern and issues, and I think it's all going to start with cities being open and communicative. Whew, can't say that very well, but being able to talk, and listen. That's going to be really important. I know when we kick off a search, that's what we're doing. We ask a question and then we sit and listen. What is it that they're looking for? And we talk to a lot of folks. I think all the recruitments are going to have to look like that moving forward. And you really need to bring candidates that reflect the community. It's so important, and it needs to be a diverse candidate pool. So I'm not saying that all the candidates have to be Black or Latino or Asian, but if that's what the community is, you need to, for darn sure, have a couple of those candidates that reflect that. I think it's really important. And what we're seeing from our clients is that's always been important, that they want a chief that reflects their community. That might not be the one they hire, but they at least can show the public, look, this is the process. This is what we went through. These are the types of candidates we had. Our firm can put out a report that shows the different types of folks who've applied, whether, how many females, Asian, Black, white. So we can provide that to our clients as well. So it's just really, it has been important for a long time, but I think it's going to be even more important now. And so I am curious to see moving forward with some of our police chief recruitments, how the community is going to react now.
Great, thanks, Valerie. And we have one more question for you, but as Valerie mentioned, don't feel like it's the end of the road. You can always send Valerie your questions later on, and we'll kind of put that in our concluding statements. Emma, what is our last and final question here?
The last question is from Andy. Do elected held positions help in addition to municipal experience for city manager and assistant city manager candidates?
Are you talking about someone where you're an elected maybe with another city, but you're applying for a city manager for a different city? I'm not really sure.
Valerie, it seems to me from the question is, what if you're an elected for a district, a water district, and you are seeking out an executive level position in a city? Great question, by the way.
Yeah. So that we see that all the time. Not all the time, but we do see that in our recruitments, and it could be a director level or CM or CEO position. So it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that you're a definite shoe into the position, because if it's a neighboring community and they know you, the council knows you, it's all politics. And so you probably are aware of that if you're already an elected sitting on a board somewhere. And there is to make sure that there's no conflict either, but it doesn't hurt. Usually we like to think that someone who's had that experience gets it and understands how to work with elected. Sometimes it does help. Other times it does not. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. And we're coming up on the end of our time. I can't believe
I know, that went by fast.
We're almost at 10 o'clock. So before we part ways, Valerie, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of impart your final words of wisdom and tell, we still have a lot of people logged on. So tell, how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So, I really appreciate, Lauren, you reaching out to me and asking me to do this, because I love doing stuff like this. And my hope today for all of you is that, you take away a few tips that are useful and help you be successful in your next interview. I know some of the things might seem a little silly and like, okay, that seems unimportant, but it is, because I've seen people fail in video interviews. So I'm hoping that you really take some of this stuff seriously about, when preparing for your next virtual interview. And the way what the future is going to look like, I think we are going to continue with video. I think that's going to continue through the end of the year, video conference interviews. It will with my firm, with the clients. I think it's going to look that way for the first round. So you really need to be prepared. And so, these uncertain times, and it's a little scary, but I don't want to seem like doom and gloom. I think that cities and counties and states, I think we'll come out of this, but what that's going to look like, I think you really need to make sure that you're polishing up that resume and that cover letter, and really, because the competition's stiff, but that doesn't mean, that just means you have to step up your game. And if you have to contact me or Gary or one of my recruiters to get some tips or some feedback, please do. I'm going to tell all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can private message me, send me messages on LinkedIn or on Instagram or Facebook. And you can follow me. It's Valerie Data Phillips or Bob Murray and Associates. Connect with both. And then you can send me a message or my email, which is Valerie, Valerie, P for Phillips, at bobmurrayassoc.com. And you can find that on our website. I think my cell phone's even on the website. I'm really great at texting, not necessarily calling people back right away, but if you text me, I'm on it. So just make sure you give me your name and why, give me some details. So this was a lot of fun today. So thank you so much. And I know some of you probably had more questions, so send me a message on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. And if we get any more questions here through our Blue Jeans app, we'll be sure to send them your way so that you can maybe respond. So thank you so much. You've been amazing. And I just got to tell you my personal takeaway, because this stuff is scary. So it's a lot of work. It can be intimidating. We know that it's competitive, but you have a way of humanizing it. And so I know I speak for everybody here most likely when I say, you've helped us to understand the human side of this process, and how being ourselves and working hard, is a good formula for recruiting and getting hired at an agency. So thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and be on the lookout for future webinar Wednesdays from the MMANC. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.